Welcome our speakers. Peter, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Peter Boersma. I am Dutch. I live in Amsterdam. I have been a designer of interactive systems since 1995. I've been a project manager, consultant, user understanding, one of my best job titles ever, information architect, interaction designer, manager of designers, director of designers, so manager of managers, consultant, freelancer, everything. I've had my experiences with design systems and design patterns, which we'll talk about today. For the last couple of years, I have focused on design operations. So improving the circumstances for designers, raising the maturity of design teams. And I do that as a freelance consultant.
Kristine, would you like to go next?
Sure. I'm Kristine. I am a lead UX designer currently at Thomson Reuters, where I specialize a lot in our education, collaboration, and patterns building initiatives. I have a background in graphic design, where I worked mostly in branding and editorial for about 4 or 5 years. And for the past 4 years, I've been focusing on UX, UI, and now specifically design systems.
Love it. Great. Thank you. Fred, would you like to share your story?
Sure, gladly. Like Peter, I've been around for a while, starting in the very, very early days of the web and working my way through all the evolution of web standards, CSS, and all those delightful technologies that we now use every day. In the past decade or so, I've been really focused on design systems at companies like Salesforce, some small startups and scale-ups, designing and architecting design systems specifically for those environments, and recently managing some UX engineers at Microsoft in the design system space.
So the goal for today is to understand design system patterns. We often talk about tokens and components, and we feel like patterns is the thing that is missing attention. I hope today we will able to uncover and maybe help people to define what is the pattern is and how they can do that within their teams as well. Let me pull a couple things from our secret board and we can get started. The first question, we would like to know what our patterns are and why do they matter, right? And we would like to do some collaboration, interactivity today, where feel free to go through these 3 questions and give your answer by clicking on this alignment scale. On the left side, if you are strongly disagree, on the right side, if you strongly agree. So the first question is, we currently have a clear governance library of patterns in our organization. The second question, it's easier to get component adoption than pattern adoption in my organization. Adoption is a huge pain point when it comes to patterns. It's hard to justify it, but we'll love to hear other thoughts here. And the third question is, our team often recreates the same UX flows because we don't have patterns documented. So that will be fun to know. Great. I can see that some people are starting adding the votes. And the first question is, what are the design system patterns are? Would you like to share your definition of patterns or maybe some like raw ideas and we'll do this exercise together?
Yeah, so I can share my kind of hot take on what I think patterns are in the context of design systems. So for me, I've always thought of them as almost subsystems, subparts of a design system, little mini systems and frameworks that define collections of something like messaging. That has a bunch of different rules. It uses a bunch of different components and design tokens, but together they make up a methodology of how do we present messaging within our organization's context, in the application ecosystem, so that it can be consistent. So little, almost mini systems within the larger design system. That's how I think.
Love it, love it.
I'll give my definition. I have a question about Fred's definition, and we'll get to Kristine's as well. So my definition is very close to that of Christopher Alexander, a guy who wrote a pattern language, who writes, and I put it on a post-it note, and I'm going to zoom in on that one, maybe looking off camera, but it basically says, a pattern describes a problem that occurs over and over again in our environment, and then describes the core of the solution to the problem in such a way that you can use the solution 1,000,000 times over without ever doing the same thing twice. The solution doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but the core of the solution is, and it solves same problem there. And we'll get to Kristine's solution definition next.
Yeah, I am pretty much aligned with you guys. Like, I see patterns as very reflective of user flows, where we're trying to get the user from step one to their endpoint.
Mhm.
And how can we do that in a consistent way that works with their mental models, that works with the goals of the business itself, and really just ties all those aspects together. And like you mentioned, Peter, making these things as reusable as possible. So that way, for example, if you are building a suite of products, easily navigate through wherever they need to go and still get the job done. And that's also like design patterns too. We will have deviations from there, but as long as the main pattern is similar across the board, that's the main goal.
Love it, love it. This is great. I feel like we are, yes, Peter. Please jump in,
I,
don't need to wait.
I have a question about threads definition, because you say it's subsets of an existing design system. My question is, does the subset need extra documentation to become a pattern or a library?
Yes, it becomes identified in past systems that I've worked in, different organizations, how it's been defined in partnership with the UX and visual design folks, is it becomes its own methodology, its own practice. How do we approach this particular problem? And it's best done when it's agnostic of any kind of technology implementation. It's really about how do we solve this problem in a practical way, as you said, in a repeatable way that can be followed consistently.
Okay.
Love it.
Because if you say it's a subset of an existing design system, it's a separate set of documentation that may refer to subsets or sets of patterns when it comes to this is how you can implement this. It refers to a subset of components when you talk about how it can be implemented. Correct?
Yeah, and in practical terms too, like within design systems, it's not necessarily like completely separate. It is just a section within the design system that identifies this particularly repeatable pattern, like messaging. How is messaging
Mhm.
addressed? There's different ways of messaging. There's system level messaging, there's contextual level messaging, there's inline messaging, but it all should follow certain core guidelines of how each one is presented as a whole for the messaging practice of your ecosystem. So that gets defined within the design system. Like you said, it refers to different parts of the more atomic parts, fine-grained details of the system, but it puts them together in a little bit more of a how-to for messaging.
Yeah, for sure. And two, a lot of times I've found teams have separate libraries for different parts of their design system. So they'll have like maybe a documentation site, but within Figma, for example, they'll have a component library. They'll have a patterns library that builds off of the component library that adds more to it. Like Fred, like you said, it's not necessarily a subset, but it's all those different patterns and steps that folks can follow using the components, using the tokens.
Love it, love it. Great. Yeah, I feel like we are aligned on the definition of patterns, right? My definition is patterns are reusable experience solutions made of components and logic that solve common user problems across flows and contexts. So again, like this is a combination of components that we can use. Great. And let's go through some of the answers, responses from the people who joined us. Yes, we can see that patterns is the new thing. It's not a new thing, but it's still evolving. There is not enough practices, there is not enough frameworks or tools that helps to define the patterns. And also, as you can see here, when we are talking about the statement as it's easier to get component adoption than pattern adoption in my organization, a lot of people are saying that they strongly agree. And third question is, our team often recreates the same UX flows because we don't have patterns documented. And this is about like how to make those patterns more actionable, more reusable, because in most of the cases, patterns is just text documenting the experience, but there is no way to somehow put it into the FigJam or into the Figma the same how we do that for the components, or reuse that as a part of the code that we do for React components, for example. And I really love resources that people share. Yes, Kristine.
I just want to add on to that a little bit. And it's not just what you mentioned, Fareed, but it's also just the discoverability of patterns. How do you know what other products are doing in your product suite or just in general in your industry? Yes, we have the websites they can visit, but internally, if you're working in a large enterprise, that documentation and kind of that discovery, like repo slash dumping ground file is key. So that way you know what everybody's doing. And so that way you can more easily figure out, okay, what's common across these patterns.
Yeah, to Christine's point, like even in smaller organizations, I've seen it where there's a strong evangelism component to patterns, like educating the teams, educating the consumers of these things so that they know what they're doing. And then also working in a very cross-disciplinary way so that everybody that is building these essentially toolkits, these patterns, these methodologies, they get together and come up with the solutions that help make this easy to think about, make it easy to consume, whether that's putting in particulars in a centralized Figma location, in a documentation website, creating robust, more advanced code patterns as well, more experiential patterns, so that they can be easily followed by the implementers of the experiences, whether that be a designer ideating through the initial process and passing that information down to the engineers that will, at the end of the day, actually implement it into production.
Yep.
So really working in that cross-disciplinary way and finding the right things for your organization, because there's no magic bullet. Every organization is different. So you have to find what works for your group, for your team. Having the right people together working on the solution together is going to get that evolution, that education that Kristine was talking about, like making sure people know and where to find stuff so that they can actually practice it on a daily basis.
I think Fareed wants to address the cross-functional collaboration later. But for now, I have a question for you two. If we feel that patterns are more universal than components, if, like Kristine said, several teams may have their own design system, their own set of components that they maintain for their solutions. If you're in the growth team, you may have different components than if you are in the enterprise team. But the patterns are more likely to be alike, especially if they are about experience principles or flows that you want to be the same over parts of your product or your product suite. That means there's a challenge of documenting them or linking the patterns to the design systems, to the components. If the components are stored separately, patterns are stored in a collaborative fashion. There's a challenge I see.
I agree. So when it comes to educating the
And I have
teams,
no
right?
solution.
There are some internet delays, but yeah, we got the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, just to repeat Peter's point there, it's not something that has a universal solution. Find what works for your group and your environment and hope for the best.
Yeah.
Like a lot of this is really just trial and error. What works today may not work next year.
I have design. We always try to unify and visualize the whole journey of the product experience, right? And maybe that's one of the access points, one of the touch points for this patterns design system documentation, where I've seen a lot of teams. We have, for example, Figma libraries with all the components inside, but we also have a master file showing all the screens and all the flows as a part of the journey map. And maybe that might be the access point for specific things. For example, when it comes to booking experience, it could be defined as a pattern. And within the journey of the product, we could say these are like 3 different access points or touch points for this specific pattern. And just by linking it to the journey master file, that might be an access point for people to learn and understand what the patterns are.
Yeah. I feel like that is a great access point, but in my experience, a lot of teams don't have that master file of their entire product's user flow. It might be existing somewhere, but a lot of the current teams, they are using just like one feature flow. And while that gives you a much more like concentrated view of what you're building, what the user goals are, things like that in that just one instance, it's also a little isolating because you don't have that full view of the product itself, whether that is at that moment or something that is, say you're building something from scratch. Maybe you don't have the whole thing plotted out yet, or it's a legacy product where you're just updating bits and pieces here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I find that there can sometimes be a disconnect between having patterns tied to product teams because of their focus on one feature of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I do see more and more organizations starting to build collections of customer journeys called customer journey atlases, because they're places where a lot of journeys come together, from very high level to lower level ones, where the lower level ones may be maintained by separate teams or by distinct teams, and the higher level ones are maintained by, or at least governed by, a design operations team, who then takes control for the larger collection of journey maps.
Mm-hmm.
And in those instances, the journey maps, assuming they are a complete picture, might be a place to also document or link to design patterns.
Love it.
Yeah.
Another thing we've been trying to do is linking, like trying to find patterns within our customer CXOs. So figuring out, okay, what are the typical experiences of the users? How can we make those experiences better? And what are the commonalities between all those experiences? Is there like a pattern we can use overall?
Yep.
Yeah. But it all comes down to the
Yeah, Fred, please.
how do you build up progressively? So you have your core tenets of your ecosystem, of your design system, and you build up to it. And these patterns have to follow those same rules. Because they're just enhancements, they're additions to what you're building. They're not new, they're not trying to contradict it. They're trying to integrate and enhance what you've already.
Mm-hmm.
However you document that, that's going to change differently. Like some teams, everybody, regardless of discipline, very comfortable with Figma. So that makes sense for that solution. But as the team grows, that gets a little unwieldy, especially as it grows to a multi-product organization, such as Microsoft, who's got
Yep.
crazy amounts of products, but they still want to follow certain consistent guidelines and rules. You have layer cakes at that
Yeah.
point, where you have your foundations that are universal across the organization, then per product, and then per feature. So it all depends what works for you. And smaller organization becomes simple. You just have the one.
Yeah.
Getting that
Sure.
communication and collaboration there is the magic.
But
And something like a wiki would then be a good solution.
A wiki, a custom built just HTML website for documentation, similar to things like Polaris, Salesforce's Lightning design system, Nordhealth. Nordhealth has a very good, simple, straightforward design system documentation. Is very clear, as where some of the other ones like Salesforce, much more complex, lots more to know, lots more little corner cases to discover. So you can compare those two and see the difference of a huge organization versus a smaller one that's more focused.
Yeah.
Other solutions, yeah, Figma's PDFs have worked, Confluence, wikis. Like I've seen it done in so many different ways. It just depends on your particular audience and what's going to work. Organization.
when it comes to sourcing and finding all those patterns, the thing that helped some of the teams is doing design system inventory workshops, where we take one specific product that we are supporting and then creating a whole sitemap of the whole experience, where we could say that, okay, like here's the dashboard page, here's the account settings page, here's where people can book the ride or do something else. And when it comes to this kind of high level overview, first it gives a quick understanding for the product teams and design system teams, what kind of functionality do we have as a product? And the second, the main objective is to do the inventorization of patterns and components. When it comes to components, it's much more easier. This is the things that we do as a part of Inspect and Reflect. where we take the components and we just like defining them. This is the component for the specific reason, documenting, etc. But when it comes to patterns, while we are doing this inventorization, it's also important to ask the participants around what kind of patterns we can define out of this exercise. And I've seen so many interesting ideas where people are saying, oh, actually, we have interesting pattern for image editing that is available when you are uploading your user profile, for example. And this is the pattern. It might not look the same, but the experience is similar. The purpose, the objective from the user problem is similar. How to start unifying and connecting the dots, not between the components, but between the patterns and this like user flows.
When
Yeah, the separation of user experience from visual design. Because in large ecosystems, you see this where image editing is a good example. You're probably going to do it across a variety of products in your organization. And you want that experience to follow the same general flow. But visually, you'll want to tailor it to each visual language of each product.
And when it comes to,
That's perfect.
do you have maybe interesting practices how to document and how to explain clearly what the pattern flow is for this specific pattern?
Yeah, and we're still figuring this out as a organization. What I've seen the teams do individually is they have started their own libraries where they will list a bunch of patterns that they've already pre-identified across their product, whether that's through realizing they're duplicating work and doing audits, different things like that list. In that Figma file, they will create a new page for each of those patterns and paste all of their Figma flows at one page. So that way they can easily like look at it at a glance, see what are the commonalities, things like that. And right now we're working on, okay, as a design system team, how can we prioritize those patterns? How can we figure out what folks really need? And how can we like look at all those commonalities and then like we've all mentioned before about what is like the essence of this pattern and how can we help people customize it to meet their needs outside of that like core pattern. So yeah, this is something we're still figuring out, like documentation, gathering resources, things like that.
One of the core
I,
inspiration.
when I worked at ServiceNow, I had a large design system team and a design ops team. And every 6 months, there was a design jam where individual teams would come together, propose, let's say, patterns or propose things that they thought would become patterns in basically a few rough sketches. So show them to other teams and discuss them with other teams to see if other teams had similar ideas, see if they could be generalized from the start and then assigned to one of the teams to implement, keeping the requirements of the other teams in mind. Another one was a team that was called the Design Experience Review Team, the DIRT team, which was basically the design police. They would review work, and as a product team, you had to show your work to that team, mandatory in an early stage. Like these are our first ideas. They would help you identify patterns and solutions and components, and later check if you've actually had applied those patterns and components, etc. And if not, you would not get sign off. You would not be allowed to put it into production. So 2 solutions there at Service. Kristine, you had your hand.
You just reminded me of something, Peter. In our organization, because there's about 20, 30 core products, we have a design ambassadors group where it's one senior lead designer from every product. They're the sounding board of the design system. So that way we can figure out what their challenges are and how we can help them out more easily. And that's one of the ways too we've been gathering patterns and documenting things by knowing what are the products working on now. How can we kind of pause this duplication of work out? How do we all work together and collaborate instead?
Love it.
Yeah, I've had similar experiences but the word I've used is often not viewed positively, which is governance. because that link, like I've always tried to keep that governance really lightweight because it's about the curation, the intentional curation of the system as a whole and each individual pattern. How is this experience being curated so that, as you both said, not everything gets to go in the system because it has to have intention. It has to have some guardrails to make sure that the experience continues in the intended way. And enhancing that part too, to like one of the things that I've seen a lot of success with is as part of those kinds of exercises, ensuring that there is a clear and agreed upon problem definition. What can everybody across the disciplines agree to being the actual problem we're trying to solve? Because once you get too much into the execution, bias really creeps in fast. Whereas if you're just describing agnostically the problem, you have a much stronger idea of, oh, okay, there are many different solutions here.
Love it, love it. And I guess I have a costume idea for this year, Design Police. So that will be fun. Great. Yeah, Fred, I really loved the thing that you've shared. The insight is to start with the problem definition of the pattern. And then there might be multiple ways how to solve that. From my side, I feel like the inspiration that we can take is from quality assurance teams. And hear me out, because they are already defining and documenting and writing tests in the ways how experiences are going through the product. They might use different frameworks like Playwright and anything else, where they say when user is on this page, when they click on this button, for example, then specific model shows up where people can define specific things. So the inspiration that I took for the patterns is actually from the quality assurance teams because they already found a way how to replicate user actions within the product in automated way. One of the things that I wanted also to share is there is a new feature from Infa where you can actually create new recordings of the experiences and record everything that you are doing within the page, and then it will able to replicate. So it also generates the playwright code here that the QA team can use. So you can the same way how you can do that for design tokens and components, defining them in the browser, you could also do that for the actions. It's still in beta. There are some issues there. This is the way how you can actually go into your products and record user actions so that you could connect and capture. This is the pattern that we have. And this is the page where this specific pattern is happening and what kind of things user needs to do perform in order to see this pattern in action, right? This is the way how you can connect the dots, still in beta, but again, just as an inspiration for people, the playwright code that is generated, this is the same thing that the quality assurance teams are using. So that might be the way how design system could solve this problem.
So one reason why I like this feature is because a good pattern starts with a visualization, starts with this is what a good example looks like. Therefore, if you have some kind of way to access a recording of a real pattern showing up in the real product and seeing it almost demoed by replaying it, a good way to visualize a pattern. You need to be very clear that it is just one implementation of a pattern and that there are many other ways, or that you should be encouraged to find other ways, but the core should be the same. The core experience should be the same.
Yeah, fully agreed with you, Peter. And with the tool like you just showed Fareed, it really allows you to either reinforce, like either confirm or dispel your biases. And really, once you've gathered enough recordings or examples of users going through whatever the flow is, that's where you can really identify, okay, this is the pattern I need to follow because evidence XYZ from what users are actually doing and how they're trying to use what you're building.
Love it. Yeah. Let's think about the maybe other design systems that you really admire and maybe some examples of patterns documentation. Kristine, would you like to go first and maybe share some of those that you really like?
Yeah. So one of my favorites that I just discovered recently is Cedar. Yes, perfect breed. And they use this a lot for their forums. So error handling, input types, validation feedback. And I find this really great, especially with how they grouped it, because these patterns, like especially around forums, are often very confusing for developers, designers, everybody really, to make sure that it's correct, like correct for whatever the team needs. And this just makes it so easy for a developer, a QA person, anybody like that to really make sure, okay, this is working how it's supposed to. This is not a bug. And especially how they give an overview of what that pattern is. It makes it easy to understand the best practices, especially around uh, text, how things should be displayed, when they should be displayed, formatting, especially the validation, content details, and all the diagrams that they do. To me, this is just really well documented and makes it easy for folks to understand what are we building, how are we building it.
Love it. I really love their anatomy screens as well. They are great.
Yeah.
Peter, do you have any other, or maybe Kristine, do you have other design systems? I see that you added Polaris.
They also do it similarly. They have more of random selection of patterns. Maybe this is what their team currently needs, but they also do like give a good example of how it helps their merchants. That I really like how they tie that directly to the users themselves and not just the teams. That way, whoever's implementing the pattern can understand, okay, how does this directly impact our customers? Yeah, that's the main feature that I liked out of that one. And when it comes to really technical pattern documentation, Lightning from Salesforce, like you mentioned, Fareed, that one is very technical when it comes to requirements, code snippets, just those really nitty gritty details that teams need to actually implement whatever they're building.
Fred, do you have any thoughts maybe on what are your favorite design system patterns are, or maybe what kind of core things to capture when it comes to documentation? Fred, you mentioned that it all starts with the problem definition, what kind of user problem this pattern tries to solve. What are the other sections within this documentation of the pattern, from your perspective, are helpful or important?
I like really going in a low detail approach first, really working with designers in that way. It's had a lot of positive impact because you're less thinking about what does it look like and you're really thinking how is it solving the problem. So that once you've got that nailed down, you can really decorate it. You can really enhance it, give it the branding, the design language, all the little beautiful touches that make the experience feel whole. So to Kristine's point there, the documentation examples, the outlines that you have screenshotted above there that show the anatomy of the experience, that show the anatomy of what does it mean to do form validation? That's a pattern. That's rules. That's beyond just the form elements themselves. It's the whole form experience. What does that mean without all the extra details like rounded corners or colors? So really going from problem definition to really focusing on the UX of the experience before you get into all the little visual details. Because the other thing those kinds of approaches have been really successful in my experience in doing is thinking about things like accessibility up front. Because if the experience is good, then accessibility becomes almost baked in because you've already thought of things like, oh, what do low vision users experience? What do no vision users experience? What do keyboard navigating users experience that don't have precise touch control? How did this look in a small viewport, such as on a mobile device, a phone? How does it look on a massive device, like a massive 100-inch touchscreen in a presentation? All these little things, depending on your context, become easier to in this kind of early stage because then you're focused on that. And the conversations tend to be about the experience and not, oh, you know what? I don't like that. Blue's not our brand color. Then you get lost into some lots of bike shedding conversations where in these problem definition and anatomy definition experience and UX experience designs, you get to focus more on the core and the meatiness of what the system is all about.
Love it. So just a quick recap here. When it comes to documenting things, starting with the problem definition and then options, like what kind of implementation examples are there. I seen, for example, the Shopify, they recorded some of the actions, some of the flows as a video. So we can start with the problem definition. And here are the examples how different teams, different products solve that within our organization. And design system team helps to connect those the same how we helped teams to connect the components. The second part is flow. I feel like anatomy helps on the component level, but maybe having some kind of flow chart where it will explain how fast user can do specific pattern or go through specific action, and also what kind of edge cases there might be something interesting. And the third one is the guidelines where we connect all the other departments when it comes to content strategy, accessibility, engineering, design, and other things, do's and don'ts, on all of that.
Yeah, at the problem definition or options to solve level, don't just look at your own systems, but also see if you can find inspiration from others. You want to start with your own proven patterns. This is what we already have. Hopefully you've usability tested and it works, because otherwise you're doing patterns for crappy solutions. So focus on your own proven solutions first, but feel free to look at how others have solved it and refer to those examples as well, because they might give you inspiration for your next iteration of your solution, where you may need to define a new component or use them in different ways or tweak them, generalize them so they work in multiple conditions. But don't forget to look outside of your own solution bubble as well.
Love it. Yeah. I feel like connecting all the related internal resources at the end, like patterns, components, is helping people to discover and navigate through documentation. And I really love, Peter, your idea on adding also references as for inspiration purposes, how our competitors are doing that. Maybe they're doing that better at the moment, so we should learn from them.
And not just your competitors, like experienced competitors.
Love it.
Fully agreed. And that's why like libraries like Carbon, Polaris, Lightning, they always pop up in conversations because of their experience, how long they've been doing things. To go back to documentation though, I just want to say thank you, Fred, for mentioning accessibility. That's one thing I find is lacking a lot in pattern documentation and any documentation really. Like that, making sure patterns are accessible and really anything we do in design systems is accessible is key. Like, even if you might not be a low vision user or somebody who has to use like voice to text or any other assistive technologies, these could benefit literally every single person who uses your website.
I feel like
documentation, folks have included these details on how to use and how to build their pattern in an accessible way. But in a lot of the documentation I've seen so far, there haven't been details like that. And moving forward, it would be great to see more of that.
Yeah, and I feel like the accessibility efforts when it comes to patterns will have a little bit different dimension, right? This is not about how to create the proper component API structure so that all the accessibility fields are supported. But when it comes to patterns, this is about like how combination of components can be defined in a way that it will be more accessible, right? Because that's becomes an experience instead of like just a one single component.
Yeah, and focus order, different considerations like that.
Makes a huge difference. Yeah, how a screen reader consumes your experience, all those little things. And to Kristine's point about documentation too, the way I've tried to encourage teams and do it myself currently and in past products is to look at the documentation as almost, if not the actual blueprint.
Yeah.
To say, I have succeeded in solving this problem. I have succeeded in building the agreed upon experience. So you should have all those things like accessibility. It should be able to do that. And that becomes particularly important when looking at patterns because they're more encompassing than a simple single component. Like a button is going to have pretty limited set of information, but a form or a particular type of form experience is going to be much more broad and have more things to keep track of. So if you've got that nice blueprint, that nice checklist that says, it meets this requirement, it doesn't do that, we have succeeded as a team and built this experience.
Love it. And I feel like patterns also enabling other disciplines to be involved in the design system, like product managers. They can share what kind of pattern worked well within their product. And for example, if we have activation flow documented, they might even connect that with the user insights and with some product metrics showing that this specific pattern out of these 3 different variations of it is the best one because we've done a lot of A/B testing. And this is the way how we can actually connect those insights within the design system and help other product teams to reuse things that are working when it comes to components or experiences as patterns. When it comes to cross-functional collaboration, Peter, do you have some thoughts how patterns maybe enable more collaborations? And because like when it comes to components, product managers are not that interested. But when it comes to patterns, this is the thing that maybe, oh, yeah, I would love to contribute or add or reuse those things.
It can speed up the discussions with product managers on scope, on complexity, on the solution direction, etc., immensely. So having a documented set of patterns can speed up discussions with product management as well as engineering. Of course, engineers hopefully also don't just reuse component level code, but hopefully also reuse like decision and flow level code and solutions. So if you can point at something that's been done before, then engineers can say, oh yeah, we still have the code, or we had issues with that code last time. We need to invest in this to make it better this time. We'll help you have good discussions with the engineers as well. So on the triad level discussions, being able as a designer to point at patterns or some of the other members of that triad come up with reminders like, hey, if we reuse this pattern, will that be a good solution as well? Sure, they can use it as well. It shouldn't be the sole, just the designers using the patterns in those type of discussion. Again, another reason to document patterns.
Brett, do you have any thoughts on cross-functional collaborations and how patterns can unlock specific things or maybe add more complexity?
It all depends, like what are the types of solutions your particular context decides to implement, whether that's at the small feature level or at the whole cross-product level. But these conversations with documentation end up surfacing, what is the repeatable thing? How do we make this as drop dead stupid, to put it bluntly, for people to consume and repeat reliably, consistently? Just like most things in design systems, as creators of these tools, we like to lean into don't make me think. It should be easy to just follow and do the right thing, and it should be extremely difficult to do the wrong thing. It surfaced things like, oh, this is an experience we're using over and over again. Say catalog listing kind of experience that has the list, the detail page, the add to cart or favorite. That's a repeatable pattern. Depending on your code base, that surfaces, okay, how do we make that easy to do? And that can create implementation solutions, both for the visual designers as well as the engineers and product folks to start thinking of this is now repeatable. In Figma, we have a repeatable drag and drop component, template, or whatever that just says, I'm using this. Here's the visual representation. Because at the end of the day, Figma really is a communication tool. It is to communicate the intent. And in engineering, that means they can implement things like templates. So if they need to build a catalog experience, they know, oh, I can just use this set of templates that have been created for me. Everything's already built out. They can't go wrong. They just give it new data and it happens automatically, reducing errors, issues, and inconsistencies. So it reveals all these opportunities to make things easier across the board.
Love it.
When you're actually building the pattern itself and the documentation, ideally involve all disciplines in that process. Designers, front-end engineers, back-end engineers, accessibility, content, project managers, that initial group of folks, they will be your core team for understanding all the facets of this pattern and really going about it in a easy to build way. I've been in many situations where we've only involved PMs and UX, or we've only involved engineering and UX. And that timeline of getting that pattern ideated to built to documented was exponentially drawn out because not every discipline was involved at the beginning.
Love it. This is why one of the top 3 sessions so far. So we had so many things that I love the patterns. I love the discussions that we had. So thank you very much for sharing your insights, Kristine, Peter, Fred. It was a pleasure having you during the session. And I will share the recording in a couple of days. Feel free to join upcoming sessions and also make sure to follow all the speakers on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for joining.
Thank you,
Thank you.
you.
See you.
fellow
Bye-bye.
panelists.